Hello there, this is Larry Green at the Gainesville Community Counseling Center, and welcome to the next episode of Welcome to the New You, where we present information on mental health, sexual health, and issues related to all sorts of things therapeutic. We are invited to send us questions, and you can send those to office@GainesvilleCounselingCenter.com. That's office@GainesvilleCounselingCenter.com. Or you can call us at 352-448-9120, and we'll take down your questions there. Our podcast is focused on education and information. It is not therapeutic in and of itself. We don't do therapy here, but we talk about therapy and issues related to mental health. So if you have questions related to depression, anxiety, bipolar, anything mental health related, sexually related, do get in touch with us at office@GainesvilleCounselingCenter.com. We are here today in part to talk about an issue that is very, very important to our community here at Gainesville Community Counseling Center, and I think to the Gainesville community at large, and that is the issue of domestic violence. And so we are pleased this morning, afternoon, whatever it is, to welcome Dr. Theresa Beachy from Peaceful Paths. And tell us a little bit about you and your work there at Peaceful Paths and how long you've been there and anything else you want the world to know.
Well, thanks, Larry. It's a pleasure to come in and speak with you and talk about domestic violence during Domestic Violence Awareness Month. We could not do the work that we do at Peaceful Paths without great community partners like Gainesville Community Counseling. You all provide a tremendous service to the clients that we refer over for our trauma counseling program. So I want to say that first and foremost is that we thank you very much for your partnership.
Glad to be part of it.
Peaceful Paths is the state-certified domestic violence center that's been around in the North Central Florida region, serving Alachua, Bradford, and Union counties since 1974. We provide a wide range of free and confidential services to both adult and child survivors of domestic violence. I've been in the work for 22 years. It's hard to believe.
Wow.
But it's a great organization that's really dedicated to our core mission of saving lives and creating change. And we know that with the great partnerships and collaborations that we have around a coordinated community response to domestic violence, that eventually we'll get ourselves to the place where we no longer have to be there. But right now, as troublesome as it is that we continue to have to be providing safety services to the extent that we are, we're very glad that we're continuing to be a resource for this community.
Well, we are too, and I know that there has been an uptick in the need for services, especially during COVID and beyond. So kudos to y'all. I don't know how you do it. In 22 years, how did you get into this line of work?
It's a long and winding road, like it is with everyone that gets into these kinds of services. I started off my life as a high school teacher, teaching in rural Hardy County, Wauchula, which was unfortunately devastated by Hurricane Ian. A lot of people aren't talking about what's happening in a lot of our rural counties, but Hardy County, great little town there in Wauchula, did that for a year, and then came back to Gainesville after graduating and leaving for a year. Came back to Gainesville and became the education coordinator at the Eckerd Youth Alternatives Residential Treatment Facility in the Ocala National Forest. And I did that for 7 years. It was a fabulous job. The camp is no longer there. Unfortunately, Eckerd had to close a lot of the camping facilities. They're just so expensive to run. And DJJ and some of our other funders decided to go different routes in terms of how they were treating kids with behavioral disorders. So. But spent 7 years running around with 60, at-risk boys in the woods, doing everything you can imagine in terms of river trips and cooking over an open fire. And it was really an experiential education program designed around thematic curriculum to get kids back on track when they had been, in the system and not functioning well. And during the 7 years that I was there, I realized that the majority of our kids, family violence was an issue. I mean, that's a lot of them, that's why they had been arrested, is that they had intervened.
Right.
But nearly all of them had witnessed some sort of violence in their home. And so when this job became available, I had been a member of the Gainesville Women's Club, little plug there for us,
there you go.
Since 1995. And we had done a lot of volunteering work with the organization, which was then SPARC, the Sexual and Physical Abuse Resource Center. So I knew about the organization and it seemed like the perfect fit, even though I had just finished my PhD in education, to leave the education field and go into advocacy work full time. And it really has been a blessing, I think, for me personally and certainly professionally. And we've seen a lot of growth in the 22 years that I've been there. We started off with I think we had 18 people on staff and a budget about $900,000. And this year we'll top out at 47 staff members and 3.6 million in our budget.
Wow. And you offer residential as well as safe housing and counseling on site, and you work not only with the adults but the kids as well.
We've really committed ourselves as an organization to being as comprehensive as we possibly can. So you're right, we serve residential and outreach survivors. So people live with us in the shelter and in our supportive housing program. And then in outreach, they can come to us for anything from the traditional support group education programs that we have, victim advocacy services if they're going through a criminal case with their perpetrator. We have an economic empowerment program that works all around financial literacy, also does a lot of our housing advocacy work. We have a child welfare advocate that's embedded with our child protective teams here in Alachua County. We also have an advocate dedicated specifically to women over the age of 60 who are experiencing violence. And then we have a high-risk team who deals specifically with people that law enforcement or our other partners have identified that their partner is potentially lethal based on some of the things that are going on. And then all of those programs have concurrent children's services. So mom comes for and I say mom because the majority of our clients are women. But if they come in for a support group or to meet with an advocate or any other service, they can bring their children with them, and we'll provide everything from childcare and tutoring to full-on support groups for them as well.
Fantastic. So we do use the term women often with domestic violence because predominantly it is male perpetrators or women who are victims, even in same-sex relationships. For men who are involved in an IPV situation, what sort of resources are available to them?
They can come in for all of the same services that a woman can come in for. Shelter sometimes gets tricky depending on how many people we have in shelter. We also know that male victims who their perpetrator is a woman, it can be kind of weird to go then live in a house with 20 adult women. That can be a little intimidating. But we try to provide those services as best we can to make them comparable. So if we have to put someone in a hotel for a period of time, we're still going to provide a lot of support. They'll still have access to food resources and basic needs and counseling and that kind of thing. So while it's not the norm for us, we definitely know how to handle it, and we do serve a number of men every year in all of our programs.
Fantastic. I think that's one of the things that for men that come here or in situations like that, there's a stigma attached to it for them. And so when I tell them you'll have services available, in their minds they were thinking, oh, that's only for women.
Right.
And so it's nice to know that service is available to them as well.
Yeah, shame is a cornerstone of domestic violence. The perpetrators use it to keep their victims convinced that no one else would love them and no one else is going to help them. And then as a society, I think we like to blame people for the situations that they feel that they've chosen to be in, and that they continue to choose to be in, not looking at the true level of diminishment that happens to people and really does take away the choices that they have.
Yeah, and I think you hit on it earlier that it's not just the person you're seeing today. It's in most cases it's their history of growing up in a situation of violence, whether they were the victims of it at home, or they saw their mom and dad get into altercations, and so that's the norm for many folks who you'll work with on a daily basis.
Well, and not even that, a lot of them know that it's not normal, but they begin to believe it's what they deserve. Because they've experienced it so many times and from so many different places in their life that they start to see that, well, it's obviously something about me that makes me imperfect, that makes me less than, and therefore not deserving of the kind of love that other people have and
Right.
experience.
And that becomes their narrative.
That becomes the story.
And it's a very difficult narrative. I think one of the challenges I always struggle with is when I hear people who have not maybe experienced a situation of violence within their relationship. You know, they talk about the victims as if it is their choice. Like, it's so simple, just leave.
Correct.
Just leave. But we know statistically that the most dangerous time for somebody leaving or getting out of it is that leaving point.
Absolutely. One of the things we know that's most destructive about domestic violence is that people compare it to rational situations in their own lives, right? So you have a relationship where you may think it's past its due date, right? You want to leave. So you have a conversation with your partner and you divide things up and you each go your own way, and that's the end of it. And in a domestic violence situation, leaving is, paramount to the worst thing you could do. Right. So then it escalates all of the violence and all of the threats and the harassment that people have been experiencing. So it's important for people to understand that domestic violence scenarios are not rational scenarios. These Correct. Are not situations where A plus B equals C.
Right.
And so it's very hard to know what will trigger a perpetrator. It's very hard to know from a victim standpoint, how to separate the person that came home yesterday where everything was fine and everything was great to the person that walks in the door today and everything is, a total wreck and
right.
you're the worst person in the world.
Right.
And leaving, always seems simple when there's not kids and there's not property and there's not religious history and there's not, family entanglements and, people stay in bad relationships for a whole bunch of reasons.
Sure.
And survivors stay in those relationships for those same reasons, plus that added dimension that if you're afraid and statistics tell you you're rational to be afraid,
right.
Then, it's easier to understand why people feel trapped and need a place like Peaceful Paths to give them an option.
Absolutely. We talk in therapy world, and I'm sure at Peaceful Paths, about the Duluth model.
Yes.
Right? And it's this wheel of ways in which abusers exert power and control over their partner. And it's not just finances, it's emotions, it's the kids, it's threats of harming them, harming self, it's control of the bank account, it's control of the car keys, it's learning how to install software onto their phones to track them. And y'all deal with this day in and day out. How do y'all as a staff kind of manage your own reactivity and emotions? Because I'm sure it can be a challenge.
It can, and vicarious traumatization is real. I think that especially when you talk about folks that are in high-risk programs or are working in the shelter and seeing people, we meet people on the worst day of their life.
Right.
And that's a hard thing, to be in a helping profession where you have a lot of empathy, and the reason that you're there is you do want to advocate for people. You want people to win
right.
In their own life. You want them to have joy and you want them to succeed with the goals that they have for themselves and their children. And you're seeing them in probably the most devastated state that they can be in,
right.
because they're, most of the time people will do everything they can to keep it together and not seek, services,
right.
because then you're admitting that it's beyond what you can manage.
Yeah.
And so when people come to us and we see that, it is difficult, but I think staff really have good processes for debriefing with one another. Our office is actually arranged so that staff share offices, and we have separated client space for that specific reason. We don't want people to be alone.
Right.
We want to have that shared community for staff as well. And then, of course, we do a lot of emotional eating. Not always the healthiest, but, it's definitely something that, we've all found our own coping skills.
Sure.
Whether it's, going to the gym or doing some meditation or, reading trash novels or, all of the things that kind of give our minds the ability to unplug and acknowledge that, we're not here to save the world. We're here to save one person at a time as they come through the door.
Right.
And if we can focus on individuals and focus on the things that that individual is presenting to us, then we can make it a good day.
Right. Several years ago, I read a statistic that for many victims, it takes 7 interactions with law enforcement before they exit that relationship. But that 7 interactions doesn't really indicate the totality of the level of abuse. That's just 7 times that they were able to call
Right.
and reach out. And I'm always interested in the shift in law enforcement's perspective, right? And I think especially down here in the Deep South, we have a history, and maybe up north too, I don't know, but I didn't live
Everywhere.
there. Yeah, that historically this was a situation between the two of you. Handle it and separate them. Right?
Correct.
How has that shifted and changed over the years from your perspective?
There's definitely been a huge shift in Florida in the way that domestic violence is handled at the state level. We actually have one of the better statutory definitions of domestic violence across the country, where we recognize that it is family or household members, and that's defined to include people who've lived together before or have a child in common, whether they live together or were ever married. So we acknowledge that the family dynamic looks different, and it's inclusive of LGBTQ plus relationships, which isn't the case in a lot of states. So
Right.
we're very progressive on that end. We also have a pro-arrest policy. So we train police officers to identify who the primary aggressor is when they go out to that scene. And it may not be the person who is uninjured. A lot of times what they will find is that, batterers provoke in order for them to be able to call the police.
Right,
So
right.
you called the police on me last time, so now I'm going to provoke, or I'm going to threaten something that I know is a line for you, right? So for a lot of women, it's, don't ever threaten my child. You touch my child, and then we have a different situation. And so we know that batterers are very good at manipulation. They're very good at colluding with police. And so we've trained officers especially over the last 15 years, we've really changed the training that law enforcement officers get around what primary aggressor looks like. We don't do dual arrests anymore. That used to be the other thing, is like either you go to your mom's and separate for, a few days and cool off, or it was, we're just going to arrest everybody and let the state attorney's office figure it out.
Right.
And we don't do that anymore in the state of Florida. It's very rare. And in our area, we do have excellent law enforcement response, great partnerships. We always have a law enforcement officer on our board. Currently, it's the chief of police in the city of Alachua, Jesse Sandusky. And, we have always been able to count on our law enforcement partners to be there in the scenarios that we can't, because we tell everybody, we don't have a gun, we don't have a gavel.
Right.
So all we can do is provide the safety and support network, but we rely on all of our partners to be able to ensure that perpetrators are held accountable and that victims get the justice that they need in the system.
Perfect. So the second component to that is the actual court system. And I'm wondering, as we hear stories from the victims, there still, from my perspective, seems to be some challenges within the court system as far as holding abusers accountable. Is that a fair statement, accurate statement?
That's definitely an accurate statement, and I don't think that we're unique in that. I don't think that Florida is unique around the country in that. Domestic violence is still one of the lowest prosecuted crimes in the country. It's difficult to work cases where you start off with a victim who is, making statements and giving testimony, who then completely flips the script on you.
Right.
And then you've got to go to court without the person there to, present the evidence as you had talked about it. The reality is that we prosecute murder all the time without a victim.
Right.
It's about telling stories. And those stories are meaningful, and they're important for people to understand. Victims recant, change their story, become angry at prosecutions all the time because they want their lives to be normal.
Sure.
They don't want their partner to be in jail. They want their kids to have a dad, and they want a breadwinner, and they want a partner who treats them with respect and allows them to, manage their own money and all those things. And when people get arrested, they will promise the moon
Oh,
to
absolutely.
get them,
Yeah.
you know, off the hook. So we know that there's good rational reasons why victims behave in what appears to be some um, irrational ways when it comes to the justice system, because the justice system fails a lot of us.
Absolutely.
You know, our system is imperfect. And so, you know, I think that we have some great leadership in this county and in this circuit that have shown a commitment to domestic violence, and a commitment to holding batterers accountable. But there are times when we still, you know, we just miss the mark, and it's the reality of it. I think that one thing people could do is really educate themselves about judicial races. Judges have the most direct impact on DV,
Right.
than any of the other parts of the judicial system, really, because that's where women go to get those civil injunctions. And so the person who's on the DV bench can really make a difference in the lives and the safety of women and children in this community.
So in Alachua County, in most district courts, there's just one person sitting on there, or do they rotate those through the judges?
They rotate them through for like kind of the on-call and after hours, but primarily there is one person in each county that is sitting on the family law and domestic violence bench.
Okay. Oh, that's interesting to know. And so you talked a little bit about the injunctions, and talk to me a little bit about what that process is like. So if there's somebody out there who thinks that they qualify and can get an injunction, what are some of the things that they need to be prepared to answer?
Well, Peaceful Paths has 3 full-time attorneys, again, for free, that people can come in and talk to about the IFP process, the injunction for protection process. And people sometimes call it a restraining order. And those injunctions really are just civil orders of protection that say, hey, based on the behaviors that you've demonstrated that may or may not also be criminal,
right.
We're going to say that you can't be next to this person, you know, and you can't harass them and contact them. And if you have children, that there needs to, you know, you guys need to go through family court and establish some sort of parenting plan. So people need to be prepared to be able to tell their story in as honest and thorough a way, and that's sometimes really daunting.
Sure.
Because the judge is going to ask you a lot of things that are really personal and can be really uncomfortable. And the reality is that the injunction process really, it's very important in terms of the continuum of services that we have around safety. But it is a civil order
right.
at the end of the day. And so people need to understand that it's not necessarily the only answer to what you need when you're talking about safety, but it is one tool in that bag that can help keep you safe.
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the things that the counselors here, you know, really, it pulls on their heartstrings, right? Because they hear a lot of times these women who are, you know, truly afraid,
right,
and have difficulty getting that injunction enforced,
yeah,
for a variety of reasons, and the lengths to which they will go to kind of protect themselves, even though they have
right.
that injunction. I mean, it's mind-boggling.
Yeah,
I mean, it's a full-time job.
It is. It's completely upheaval for your life and chaos for you and your kids, and yeah,
absolutely.
It's not an easy process.
No, it's not. And, you know, when we think of domestic violence, you know, it's not just the physical part.
My son is texting me, which he doesn't always do. Let me just see what he needs. He's got this note too.
Oh.
Okay. Sorry about that.
That's all right. You ready?
Yep. I was just afraid that that's what he was going to say.
So when we're thinking about domestic violence, you know, oftentimes we think of the physical part of it, but we don't really understand many times the effects of the emotional abuse and the verbal abuse. And so people will look at victims and they say, well, you don't have any bruises on you.
Right.
But the internal bruises are absolutely devastating.
Oh, I think the tape in your head is so much more destructive than what people can, do to you in a physical way. Just because it lives with you,
Mm-hmm.
and that process that victims go through where they start to feel diminished in
Right.
who they are, the messages that perpetrators use to kind of fill up the space in
Sure.
their head and take up emotional room with them is so destructive, because it undermines their self-esteem. It undermines their judgment.
Mm-hmm.
It oftentimes distracts from their ability to make basic decisions for themselves and for their kids. And when you get into that place where your reality doesn't feel real because someone is constantly undermining what you say is, this is how I feel, no you don't, this is what it
Right.
is, no it's not, this is what I saw, no you didn't, there becomes a very difficult it becomes a very difficult journey back to finding who you are.
Right.
And I think that is the more destructive piece of the domestic violence dynamic that doesn't get talked about, because it's not something you can get an injunction for. It's not
Right.
something you can have someone arrested for. And it's the thing that really powers the engine of power and control.
Absolutely.
And so yeah, it's very upsetting when we talk to women and we know that that's what they've experienced, and we start hearing the messages that
Mm-hmm.
their perpetrator has given them coming out of their own mouth, the excuses that they make
Yeah.
for them, all of that. It's very hard, because we know that there's a lot of undoing that has to be worked through, and again, that's why we're so fortunate to have partners like you can help women on that journey.
Yeah, and that is a difficult journey to kind of rewrite that script and empower them. And I think that's part of what we see our role is empowering them to get back to that place where they can differentiate the abuser's message
Right.
from their own.
Correct.
And tap into that strength base that they do have,
They
because
do.
there's a lot of strength that has kept them going even in the midst of horrific situations. And so that's what we focus on is you had this horrific situation, where are some of those resources that you can tap into for
Right.
yourself, right?
Right.
I think when I first got into counseling, I had that white hat, whatever they call that thing, right?
Yeah.
The savior hat. I just wanted to save,
Right.
because my first place with counseling was with childhood sexual victims, and so there's a lot of domestic violence that was wrapped up in that as
Sure.
well. And then we work with the parents, and I wanted to save all of them, right, and fix their situations. And it quickly became apparent to me that the more I tried to fix, the more I disabled them, or I blocked them from their own autonomy.
Right.
And that's what we're trying to give them back, and that's what y'all are trying to do, is give them back that sense of self, that strength, and that hope, and that resilience.
Right. It's putting that one person at a time on that path to self-sufficiency, emotional self-sufficiency, financial the ability to trust yourself again.
Right.
And that is huge.
Yes, absolutely. And the other thing I noticed is that, this is not something that is simply relegated to one segment of society, right? It's not a poor thing.
Not.
It's not a lack of education. This is something that permeates all levels of society.
It is.
Is that what y'all are experiencing as well?
Yes, and I think that the difference is for Peaceful Paths is that we're kind of a last resort for people, right? No one wants to come to shelter. Shelter is hard. It's communal living, but it's wonderful in the sense of, you're there with people who really do want to advocate for you and help you find your sense of self again. But to pack up your life and pack up your kids and move into one room in a large home is hard.
Yeah.
So people who have any other ability to access resources are gonna choose something different.
Right.
They're gonna buy a plane ticket and go to their sisters in California and hang out until they figure out what their next move is, or they're gonna pay for private counseling because they can afford that or their insurance covers it.
Right.
So when you look at who we're serving, we're predominantly serving people who are kind of caught in that cross section of domestic violence, racism, sexism, poverty,
Mm-hmm.
and it's, it becomes a certain socioeconomic group that we serve. But the reality is that there are victims in every group within our community. And some of the worst instances of domestic violence that we've seen in Gainesville have been in very, upper and
Okay.
upper middle class and upper class, households where
Right.
people were suddenly shocked, and it's like, no, that kind of control can exist in any relationship. And if you look at, the high profile cases that have happened nationally,
Right.
the Gabby Petito case, it was like, these are kids that had enough resources to be able to travel the country
Right. Yeah.
for, months and months at a time. These were, they were not lacking resources. That does not protect you.
Right.
Education does not protect you. The reality is that none of us fall in love with bad people. We fall in love with people we don't know everything about. And as we learn what those traits are, then sometimes you find yourself in a situation you never pictured.
Right.
Especially when you are someone that didn't have a family history and thought, I made, good choices in my life in other areas. How did I end up here?
Right. Well, that's why it's called a cycle of abuse, right?
Correct.
It's not like the abuser comes to you and says, "Hey, I want to have a relationship with you that's going to be based on abuse."
Right.
They suck you in, and they often lift you up. They give you praises. They make you feel good. They
Right.
lavish stuff on you, and then they begin to test the waters in different ways of control.
Right.
And then they give you that problem. I'm so sorry. That'll never happen again. I'll change. Right, which feels good, but therein lies that cycle, right? And so if you're in love with this person, if you have that passion for this person, then okay, but that cycle itself is what sucks you in
Right.
and gets you into that world where you don't know what's real and what's not real.
And if you find yourself starting to have to reduce your boundaries, and shrink yourself to fit into somebody else's box, that's when you know that the relationship isn't healthy for
Correct.
you. And then when you add those dimensions of it becoming fearful and becoming violent, threatening, that's, again, it's taking it to a different level. And no one is immune from that.
Right. So let's talk a little bit about some of those things that people should be looking out for, whether, it's me and my children, watching them in their relationships, or my friends, or even I'm thinking I may be in this kind of a situation myself. What are some of the things that we should be looking out for?
Well, red flags for us start with boundaries. So people who don't allow you to have boundaries in their relationship, that they want to spend all their time with you. They want you to maybe eliminate friendships or, reduce the amount of contact you have with your family. So they're isolating, they're jealous. We always say jealousy isn't a sign of how much someone loves you. It's a sign of how much they want to control you.
Right.
And so it's not romantic. Don't see it that way. And then also, what's their history of relationships that they've had. So there's no shame in looking someone up to find out if they've had those civil injunctions placed against them in the past. Because this is someone that you're bringing into your life. You deserve to know those things. And another red flag that we always look at is, how fast the relationship is moving. So is it one of those whirlwind things where, it's because maybe they can't maintain this level of, good behavior for so long. So it's, I want things to move very quickly. And, making a lot of promises, trying to make you financially dependent. Oh, quit your job and, I'll take care of both of us. And, is that about really wanting to give you the freedom to do something else in your life? Or is that about wanting to have complete control over you and believing in certain gender stereotypes that may or may not, again, fit your value system? So it's important to trust your gut when you're starting a relationship and there are things about it that make you question, is this really for me? Listen to that and talk to people. And, there's a lot of resources online that can give you information, whether it's at the Futures Without Violence website or domesticshelters.org. that can just give you a great series of pieces of information that you can look at and compare, what's my relationship, what are the things that I'm seeing versus what people identify as being either domestic violence or a precursor to that power and control dynamic.
Yeah, and sometimes people, outside the relationship will approach them and say, this seems to be an unhealthy pattern that I'm seeing. And my experience with those folks is, they end up giving up because they said, well, they've gotten themselves in, and I've already done all I can.
Right.
My encouragement to them is to find ways to stay connected with that person.
Right.
Right? Because without that connection, they don't have an out. They don't have an escape. But it can be quite frustrating,
right,
from the outside. I remember a client whose daughter, the mom came in and said, Larry, I don't know how she doesn't see it. And I said, well, she can't fully see it because she's in it. She's swamped.
Right.
And her dad was so mad that he didn't want to have anything to do with her. And I said, you have to be the lifeline at this point. As difficult as it is, she's going to need to hear your voice. And because he's trying to silence you.
Right.
He doesn't want you in that situation because he wants full control. And so how do you manage that and balance that safety, right? Because at some point, potentially, he could say, you talk to mom again and X will happen.
Right.
So what do we tell moms and dads? And
I think that the hardest message for friends and family to understand is that it's not about them. You may not like the person. You may clearly see that this is not someone that's good for them, based on your value system and all of that. But when you go into the you need to, you should, you must lecture, you're doing exactly what the batterer is doing, which is you're disempowering them. You are removing their ability to make choices for themselves. You're undermining their judgment. You're telling them that they're not smart enough to make decisions.
You're entering, in many ways, the same abusive system.
Right. You are reinforcing the same messages that the batterer gives, which is that someone else needs to take control of your life because you're not smart enough to do it for yourself.
Right.
So reminding people that it's not about them, that it's about the person that they love, and it's about the person who's stuck in this cycle at the moment. So just letting them know that they're not alone, and that whatever decisions they make moving forward, you're not going anywhere.
Right.
I'm always going to be at the same number. I'm always going to be at the same place. You know how to get a hold of me. You may not have reached out to me in the ways that I wanted you to, or as often as I wanted you to, but when you do, I will be there, and I will be there without judgment. And that is so hard for people. I will be there, and I will be there without judgment.
Yes.
Because again, I'm seeing a snapshot. You're living a movie.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know everything that goes on, and I know all the messaging that you've received. I don't know the narrative you're living in. All I can see is what I am experiencing from you when we're together.
Right.
And so what I would encourage people to say to the people that in their lives that may be impacted by this issue is that, I see you, I love you, I'm here, and when you're ready and when you need me, you know where to find me.
Right.
And I'm never going away. And there's not a limit on the number of times you get to call, and there's not a limit on the amount of resources that you're going to need and you're going to ask for. I may not be able to provide all of them, but I'm certainly going to stand by and walk with you on this journey.
Right. This is not a similar situation to dealing with somebody who's addicted to drugs and alcohol, where sometimes you have to take that tough love perception or perspective, right? It's totally different.
Right.
And I think that's where they eventually get. But you're exactly right. You get there not because of the other person. You get there because you're frustrated. You can't handle it.
Right.
Because you think you know the best option. And we can't save everybody.
No, and the reality is that there are many people who trade domestic violence situations for poverty.
Yes.
Right? So you leave that relationship and now you can't maintain, because you've got children and maybe your work history is not great, and he was the primary breadwinner and all of those things, you know, that's going to be a hard life. That is not necessarily a life that's easier than what you're living.
Correct.
And so giving people the resources to know how to stay safe in their relationship, and to get their partner the resources that they need to help them manage their emotions better, to
Right.
see their paradigm as one that, you know, you can be in a loving, committed relationship without a power and control dynamic.
Right.
Let's help get you there.
Right.
And we've got great resources in this community that can help on both sides of that. And, you know, we would never advocate for couples counseling. I don't want anyone to hear me
Nope.
say that. I want to say that clearly. We do not advocate for couples counseling. But we do let women know that the choices that they make really are theirs and theirs alone. And we're going to support them. And if it's the best option for you right now is to go back to that relationship, but go back having more information and having more access to a network, that's a win.
Right.
Because, you know, we don't want you to be in a position where you're going to get evicted and you can't feed your kids, and, you know, life is more of a struggle.
Right.
And then you're eventually going to end up back or in a different relationship that, again, isn't necessarily healthy.
Right.
We want people to be able to make informed, empowered decisions. What those are really are theirs and theirs alone, and
Right.
we're just going to continue to offer the resources.
And I think that's the other thing that people don't often consider, is that this is not just something that impacts this individual or this family. There is a societal impact and an economic impact, and it touches us in ways that we don't really even understand or are aware. Employees who are missing work, children who are missing school, it impacts the educational achievement, it impacts income. So it's not just domestic violence. I mean, domestic violence is something that is part of and partial to our entire economic system and our socio-political system. And so if we're able to get a handle on this in some way, shape, or form, then the potential benefits for society as a whole, which would mean, I think in part, that we find ways to dismantle that toxic masculinity, that we dismantle, I'll go a little religious here, some of that religious teaching, which is very hierarchical.
Right.
and very damaging to the family
Patriarchy
system.
is alive and well.
It is. But then again, we live in a society and a culture in the deep south, I guess is what we call ourselves,
Right.
Where it's still alive and well. And I think that's a campaign that we all have to kind of keep pushing, is that teaching men that they are the head of the household doesn't really help them to be a healthy partner.
Oh, I would argue with anyone who says that the teaching of young children, what gender roles really should look like, which
Yep.
is that you do what you want to do. There, you know, we continue to socialize children to believe that, you know, boys do this and girls do
Sure.
this, and they don't cross, and that's why we have so many issues when we get into relationships, because we have very unrealistic expectations of what a romantic relationship should be.
Mm-hmm. And it's not Disney.
And it's not Disney. And it certainly isn't The Bachelor.
Right.
And, you know, and we have very unrealistic expectations of ourselves, of what it means to be a man, what it means to be a woman.
Right.
And those things all create, you know, a hot mess when it comes to trying to form those healthy relationships. And so learning good conflict resolution skills, learning what it means to manage your emotions and to be mindful
Right.
of how you're feeling, and being able to identify what you feel so that you're better able to, you know, talk about it and
Sure.
express those emotions, is critical education for every child, you know, from early childhood on. And when we fail kids in those ways, and
Mhm.
you know, it's one of the reasons why our violence prevention program is such an important piece of the work that we do. You know, we believe that if we can teach kids what healthy relationships look like, and we can, you know, address bullying, and we can address gender stereotypes,
Right.
and have discussions about conflict resolution and what bystander behavior should be when it comes to your friends and how they treat each other in
Sure.
their dating relationships. we can dramatically impact the incidence of domestic violence as these people move forward in their adult lives. And it's great that we have fantastic partners in this community that let us into the schools to do those things, and let us into community programs for youth to do that education component. And it's the most critical piece of all the things that we do. The prevention is the most critical piece because it gives us the avenue towards working ourselves out of a job.
Yes.
Because again, I think we do a huge disservice to young men in our society by continuing to reinforce, the man up concepts and the toxic masculinity, just as we do young women a huge disservice by continuing to sexualize them from a very young age, and give them very unrealistic expectations of what romantic relationships mean in their life. We in our financial literacy program, the room that we use, the sign that's on the wall is a man is not a financial planner. and so just again empowering young women to find their own way in the world and be self-sufficient, just like we encourage every young boy to do. That creates a different dynamic when you're talking about then a relationship where we talk about shared financial decisions and shared parenting, and that's
dads
really
aren't babysitting.
Dads are not babysitting. You can't babysit your own kids. You parent your children. Yes, and it's an infuriating language, and language matters.
It does.
And it's one of the things that, again, that violence prevention program and our community awareness programs really focus on the fact that language is important, especially when it comes to issues around intimate partner violence, because that's how batterers get in your head.
Yes.
It's the language.
Absolutely.
And so when we start deconstructing some of that and looking at the intersectionality of how this issue is based on our history in this country of sexism and racism, and how we deal with vulnerable populations and how we manage poverty, then we better understand why victims feel trapped.
Yes, absolutely. I'm with you. We have a group that we run here. We're trying to get started, particularly for young adult men. And am I allowed to say the name?
Yeah.
It's how not to be an asshole in your relationship.
Oh.
And it deals with, if you're familiar with the Gottman method, it's all the Gottman stuff, right? And teaching men how to understand their own emotional reactivity, how to utilize those skills, and how to talk rather than act out,
right.
How to ask for what you need rather than manipulate or demand or pout when you don't get your way.
Right.
And in part, it comes as a result of a lot of the work that our counselors have done, with your population
sure.
and your folks. That, if we don't address that part of it too, and start to change the concept of the men's perspective on who they are as men and what does it mean to be a man,
right.
This is going to continue to be a perpetual problem.
Yeah, and we've accepted. It's funny. We've accepted as a society that women are different than they were 100 years ago.
Right.
But somehow men are exactly the same. And it's
we don't know how to change.
Yeah, well, and it's that idea that we all have to evolve. You can't say that it's acceptable for, we don't treat children the way that we did 100 years ago. For certain, I mean, we don't treat children the way we did a generation ago. Exactly. In terms of how we understand their development and the things that they need. And so why we can't see that there needs to be an evolution in the way that we structure male activities when they're kids, expectations, the nurturing, all of those things. And it's not about making us all the same.
Right.
It's about letting each of us blossom in what we are and who we are, and acknowledging that there are strengths and differences between men and women isn't making one better or one worse.
It's just the reality.
It's just the reality of their difference.
I think it hits on two core issues, for some on the right in particular, and that is that it is a threat to traditional patriarchy, right? When you begin to talk about the changing roles, right? That means that maybe the way we did it in the past wasn't correct, and to I'm too unaware of my own need to change, and I don't want to admit failure or admit fault.
Right.
And then there's also this reality that we almost demonize the change in women, right? As they
Sure.
begin to own even their own sexuality, right? That's seen as a bad thing, right? And so as women have come to grow in strength and be more self-confident and have and continue to just blossom, it continues to threaten, you know, the male mystique.
Right.
And I think for a lot of guys, that's a big change. That's a big challenge.
It's a huge shift in like I said before, the language and the terminology that we use for things, and just how we view what feels natural and feels normal.
Mm-hmm.
It feels normal to see the man in charge of the government. It feels normal to see the man in charge of the military.
Right.
And then when we see women in those roles, there's cognitive dissonance. Oh no, something's not right.
Right.
And I think that for when we bring it back to how that impacts domestic violence, women are in these relationships are often just told, like, you can't do the things that I do. You're incapable
Right.
of doing the things that I do. And someone needs to take care of you, and someone needs to manage you. And again, when we don't see it in the wider society, it just reinforces those messages.
Yeah.
When you file paperwork in the state of Florida as a married couple, the man's name always goes first, no matter what.
Right.
And so that's just it's a silly tradition. It's a silly way that we do record keeping, but it reinforces the messaging that women are lesser than.
Yeah.
Correct.
Even pace that women receive, right? Because they've done lots of studies on the fact that you could have two individuals, a male and a female, doing the exact same job as a CEO, and the women make substantially less.
Right.
Right. And so it's there as well. So I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done there. And I think Gainesville is, more forward thinking in many ways about that, but I know we still have a ways to go.
I think the world is on a pendulum swing backward a little bit right now, which happens very frequently when there's progressive movements forward. The backlash, comes with it. And we've seen that in domestic violence, many times in the past, where we make inroads, like with VAWA, and, we get legislation passed, and we get Office of Justice, putting out, grants and programs and all of this. And then you suddenly have, a number of legislators at the national level who will just oppose it.
Yeah.
And it's like, how can you oppose this?
Violence against
Right,
women.
right. And so, understanding that it's a kind of a natural reaction to progress is one thing. Seeing it manifest in, the undermining of Roe v. Wade and the potential risk for women in general is very disconcerting. When you sit in chairs like mine, because we know that everything that affects women affects vulnerable women that much more.
Right.
And the population of people that we're serving really are vulnerable women.
Absolutely. So as we come to an end, what are some things that the community at large, how can they reach out and help? You get plugged in as volunteers, or even donate money,
Sure.
which would be helpful. How do they do that?
There are so many ways that you can get involved with Peaceful Paths. Probably the easiest one is to follow us on Facebook. When you do that, you get a lot of our daily messaging around needs and things like that are immediate. You'll see all of our upcoming programming opportunities, and it also gives you links to different pieces of information that you can share in your networks. Again, to just kind of increase we call them our allies in action, that are out there helping us do the work every day. If you've got a group that would like to come take a mission in action tour, we'd be happy to do that for you. You can just contact us through our website and we'll get that set up. And then, of course, if you want to make a donation and you want to be involved in the monetary support of survivors and their children, again, you can go to peacefulpaths.org/donate. And there's a tab right there where you can make a donation, designated or undesignated, for programming. And but we have a whole range of ways that groups can get involved, from raising money to doing food drives. Neighborly November is coming up.
Mhm.
That's a great way to support us. And then our holiday giving program that'll be taking place through December. And again, all of that information can be found on our website and our Facebook page.
Fantastic. Do you have the Twitter thing too?
Yeah, if they're on Twitter and Instagram, they'll see us there too, because it all feeds together.
Fantastic. Well, I certainly have appreciated our conversation and appreciate the work that y'all do. And I think it's of the many things that happen in Gainesville, I think Peaceful Paths is one of the most awesome organizations out there. And I certainly appreciate the difficult work that y'all do. And so let's plug it one more time with the website and your phone number if folks need to get in touch with you.
Sure. So you can find us on the web at peacefulpaths.org. You can call our 24-hour helpline number anytime for assistance at 352-377-8255, or you can text us at 352-792-0948. If you have questions about your relationship, if you want more information about how to get involved with our organization, again, you can find us on the web or follow us on Facebook.
Well, thank you again for all that you do. And we are the Gainesville Community Counseling Center. We are proud to partner with Peaceful Paths, and you can find us at GainesvilleCounselingCenter.com or call us at 352-448-9120. It's getting to be that time of the day where I can't remember anything good. And I encourage each and every single one of you listening or watching to go to the website and to become an ally in action, because without you, the system will continue to produce a lot of victims. So go and get busy. Peace.
Thanks.